Hey guys, today I'm going to do something a little different. I'm going to recreate Mike Hawley's Puki. But first, the backstory. A Puki is a device used as a turntable or a base mold for a round bottom pot. The bottom is formed in the Puki, then the Puki holds the pot up as you rotate it, as you work on it, keeping the bottom from becoming flattened out on the flat working surface and forming that bottom rounded shape. They're pretty ubiquitous around the Southwest for forming pots. Not every culture used Pukis, but most definitely did. Michael Hawley was one of the first pottery replicators in the American Southwest. He worked recreating Hopi Sigyati polychrome and White Mountain redwares way back in the 1980s when almost nobody was doing this, finding the raw materials and figuring out how to recreate these ancient pottery types very authentically. He's been dead since 2012, but his work still sells for very high dollars on the market. There's a lot of people who will tell you that Mike Hawley wasn't a nice person, and I'm not here to defend Mike Hawley or anything that he did. I never knew Mike Hawley. I do know that everybody does some bad things and some good things. And so most of us are a composite of the good things we did and the bad things we did. In creating all the forms for the Ancient Pottery Challenge, I wanted to go very authentic in the size and shape of the Oya I made. And in doing so, I looked at those Tularosa Oyas that I was trying to recreate, and I realized that the average size of those were about 12 inches in diameter, and I didn't have a Puki large enough for the task. And so I asked another replicator friend of mine here in Tucson, who happens to have been a friend of Michael Hawley's, if he had any Pukis he could lend me that were the right size. And he lent me this Puki, which he said was Michael Hawley's Puki. So this Puki has some historical significance in the world of ancient pottery replication, in that this was Michael Hawley's Puki, or one of Michael Hawley's Pukis, I should say. The useful thing about this is it's a good rounded form in about the 12.5 to 13 inch range. Although I have to give this back to my friend now that I'm done forming the Oya, I do want to have a Puki of this size, so I want to make a Puki out of this. And then I got to thinking about it. If I form a new Puki inside of this one, that Puki is going to be significantly smaller. Now remember, I already have Pukis in the 10 inch range. I've got a quarter, let's say the clay of the Puki itself is a 1/4 inch thick. I lose a 1/4 inch thickness on either side. That's a 1/2 inch of diameter right there. Then the clay that I form in it is going to shrink maybe 10–12%. So now, not only am I 1/2 inch smaller right off the bat, now it shrinks 10 or 12%. I'm getting really close to that 10 inch Puki size. So I'd like to recreate this as large as I can. Now I could form a jar in it, lift the jar out, and then form a Puki on the bottom of that jar. But in that case, I've shrunk that 10 to 12%, whatever the shrinkage of that clay is, twice, right? So once, when I form the jar, and then the jar shrinks. So the jar is slightly smaller than the Puki it was formed in because it shrunk, let's say 10%. The jar shrunk 10%. Now I form a Puki on the bottom of the jar, then that Puki also shrinks 10%. How much smaller than the original Puki am I? 20%? That's not acceptable, right? That's not really having the same Puki. That's having a much smaller Puki that's roughly the same shape as Mike Hawley's Puki. So here's what I want. I want a hump mold that is formed in this shape. The opposite of this shape, the reverse of this shape. So this is essentially a slump mold, an interior mold, right? I want this form in a hump mold. That way I can form the Puki, the slab of clay, over the outside of that hump mold. Yes, it's still going to shrink 10%, but I'm not losing the thickness of the clay, and I'm not shrinking it twice the way if I make a jar and then form it off of the jar. So I think that's the way to get a Puki as large as possible out of this, is to form a hump mold in this. Now, I don't want to pour plaster of Paris in this plaster of Paris Puki because it will stick. So my idea is I'm going to put newspaper down in here. I thought about paper mache, but I don't think I have to glue the paper in place. I think I can just wet it and place it in there and then pour the plaster of Paris on top of that to create the hump mold. So that's what I'm going to do. The other thing I'm going to do has to do with this edge. Because the metal bowl had this slightly rounded out edge here. It's very hard to get a good edge on your pot that doesn't kind of do that too, which is not acceptable. So I'm gonna get some wet clay and I'm gonna press it around the edge here just a little bit to kind of keep the material from kind of flowing into the shape of that metal bowl, the way it outflares at the end there. And then I'm gonna put the paper over the top of all of this, the plaster of Paris and my damp clay. And then I'm gonna pour fresh plaster of Paris inside of that to create that hump mold. All right, let's get started. About what? 3 times as much? Maybe? Okay. All right. So in the case of expediency, I am just gonna dump the water all in at once. That's cold water out of my refrigerator. And then I'm gonna mix like mad. Don't slop it around, Mr. Ward. You'll be sorry. Do not want this stuff all over your camera equipment or even your clothes. Oh, can you believe it? More. I still don't have enough after all that. Wish I had a rubber spatula. A slab that's about 15 inches in diameter. Tiny bit more in some places and a little less in others. So let me start trimming this thing. I do not want to pick up any of that plaster in my clay. I can see how that's going to be hard to do. Hard not to do, I should say. see the clay was still pretty floppy when I pulled it off there. But if you leave that clay to dry too long on a hump mold like this, it will crack. Because the clay itself is shrinking, but the mold underneath is not. And so it will shrink around that form and pull itself apart. So that's why I was in a hurry to get it off, even though it really wasn't ready to be handled. I kind of distorted the shape a little bit when I moved it because it was so floppy. And I've tried to fix that a little bit, but I'm just gonna have to let it be and try to work on it a little more when it's firmed up a little bit. It's like 105 degrees out here in this porch right now, so it's gonna dry fairly fast. All right, so it's the next morning. I wrapped this up good last night because the way it was drying, sitting up like that, the rim was drying too fast, and I don't want it to dry unevenly. I tried setting it upside down, but because the rim isn't real level, it was putting pressure on two particular points. I think what I'm gonna have to do is set it on something soft, you know, like a small cushion or something, so that it doesn't put too much pressure on a couple points in the rim and crack it. So it can dry upside down. Anyway, it was wrapped up in plastic, and there you go. Looking good. I think this will make a fine Puki. Like I said, the rim isn't real level. Because of the way I did it, I just threw that slab on that hump mold and then trimmed around the base. You know, the rim's kind of wonky, but it's just a Puki. It's not a big deal. So I think as long as I've got a nice rounded shape, I'm gonna be fine. I've also made sure that it'll sit right. So you don't want a Puki that's a little lopsided. If it doesn't sit fairly level, you end up with weird lopsided pots. So it's working pretty good. It's still a little damp. I'll let it dry out today a little bit more. I have one more of these to make because my friend Bobby Silas, who I'm going to visit next month, wants one of these as well. So I'll have to do another one before I'm done. Also, I still have to cut off the handles that I built into there. So once I poured this into that old Puki, I was worried about how I was going to get it out of the Puki. I stuck these pieces of wood in there so that I could lift it out. But now they're just in the way. So I will get a saw and I'll cut those off. I just don't want to do it until the plaster has set up good, nice and hard. So I'll wait. There's no rush on that. That's why I had it propped up on bricks though. Now, if you're interested in making Pukis specifically, I mean, not all Pukis are made exactly like this. This was a special case. I have a free lesson on my website on how to make Pukis that you might find interesting. And I give that away in exchange for signing up for my email newsletter. So I'll put the link to that lesson down in the doobly-doo. You can either purchase it or just sign up for the email newsletter. You'll get a coupon code where you can purchase it for free. And that's a how to make a Puki lesson. One other item I wanted to mention to you is the Southwest Kiln Conference that's coming up the last week of September, so a little over a month away. It's a great way to learn if you're interested in primitive pottery, if you're interested in pottery replication. Lots of replicators will be coming together there at the Southwest Kiln Conference to learn from each other, to share ideas, and to fire pottery. So I will put the link to that on the screen here and down in the doobly-doo. So if you're interested at all in primitive pottery and ancient pottery replication, or if you just want to come hang out, have a good time, Southwest Kiln Conference, I think it's 24th, 25th, 26th of September 2021 in Blanding, Utah. All right, I hope you enjoyed this video today. Hope you got something out of it. If you did, hit that thumbs up. That'll help me know that you liked this video and I can make more videos like this. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you next time.